As President Trump's biggest warship, the USS Gerald R. Ford, has now arrived in the vicinity of Venezuela to do whatever. America's formerly most reliable alliance, that with the United Kingdom, has finally started to fracture over the administration's murderous activity. So let's discuss. It's hard to understate how important it has been to the UK, certainly from the time of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, for Britain to be seen as the most steadfast and reliable ally of the United States. That has been tested at times, but time and time again the country has lined up behind leaders and actions that many in the British Parliament and public may have found pretty controversial. Now, nobody was ever going to test that relationship quite as much as President Trump Mark II, having seen British Prime Minister Keir Starmer play a deft hand in getting into Trump's good books, flattering him with a state visit and all the rest of it. But there is a line, and it seems as though Trump finally crossed that line when he ignored international law and carried out lethal strikes against boats in international waters but in the vicinity of Venezuela. The thing is that Britain has routinely shared intelligence with the USA in the Caribbean, where it has a number of overseas territories, and it has carried out operations of its own in coordination with the US. For example, in September last year, the Royal Navy intercepted a narco sub for the first time, found £160 million worth of cocaine on board. 11 suspects were arrested, not summarily killed, note, intercepted and arrested. But in the last month or so, the US, of course, has been killing an estimated 76 totally unknown people allegedly involved in drugs trafficking. And in response to that, the United Kingdom ended that intelligence sharing. The United Nations Human Rights Chief Volker Turk has said about the US actions that they violate international law and they are effectively extrajudicial killing. UK sources told CNN that basically the government there agrees with that assessment and has taken the decision to ensure that it is not complicit in those illegal actions. So no intelligence as to the presence of suspected drug smuggling boats or submarines is now being passed on. Brian Finucane of the International Crisis Group told the Guardian newspaper that if the UK government was involved, it would likewise potentially be liable. He said this: "There's no serious argument there is anyone other than civilians on these small boats, despite what the US government says. So that should be an obvious concern if the UK or other countries who could in some ways be supporting these lethal strikes. Those countries would also need to think about supporting a potential act of aggression against Venezuela. A US invasion or even airstrikes on the country would be a clear violation of international law." The US administration, of course, doesn't really give two hoots about international law, which has no bearing on its activities at all in the might makes right world order that it seeks to project itself into. The question is whether the mere fact of Trump doing that de facto abolishes the old UN-based rules order, or whether such actions might turn out, in retrospect, to have been aberrations quickly to be disowned in the future and punished. Britain has to date showed no signs of coming to terms with the stark challenges that Trump has posed to the world order, seeing it as in its interest to pretend that everything's just business as usual for as long as it possibly can. But this decision not to share intelligence with the Trump team, it's the first crack in the veneer. It raises the question of whether this is just the beginning, and all of those other countries across Europe and Asia, Australasia, who have been trying to hold it together, will finally be forced to draw a line and take a stand against Trump's America. Worth noting that Canada has also been customarily a US ally in helping to intercept suspected drug traffickers in the Caribbean over decades. But according to CNN, Canada has also made it clear that while it is currently still providing intelligence, it does not want that to be used to help target boats for deadly strikes. Whether Mark Carney and his government continue to believe that US promises on that score are sufficient, we will have to see. The UK has other reasons not to believe in such promises. For instance, Trump's FBI director, Kash Patel, reportedly agreed with London that a key FBI liaison agent based in London who dealt with high-tech surveillance tools that could be used should China get its new embassy there, for instance, that his job should be protected. A promise that turned out to mean precisely nothing, since even as Patel made the promise, the job had already been marked to be cut, and duly was. MI5 officials were said to have been left incredulous. The actual head of the agency had given that undertaking and then casually broken it. This, after a history where they had worked closely together with their US counterparts, had established what was then held to be a high degree of trust. Now MI5 and the heads of the security services for the other Five Eyes Alliance countries, Australia, Canada and New Zealand, have been watching with dismay as the FBI removed people focusing on international threats and terrorism, turning instead to internal targets of the president. Phil Gursky, a former analyst with Canada's intelligence agency, told the New York Times this: "In all of my life, 32 years in the business, I have never seen a law enforcement or intelligence organisation like the Bureau be directed to go after people purely on political, vindictive reasons. In a Western democracy, that's unheard of. It's every day in Russia and China." Obviously, that's the sort of observation that we've been making here on this channel for the last 9 months, as all of this has played itself out. And it was always obvious that, unspoken in public as it may have been, the countries that had staked so much on being close allies of the United States were processing exactly those same thoughts. The question was and remains, how far does it have to go before it's a step too far and a stand is going to be taken? Will that step too far come with whatever happens next in Venezuela? Because yes, with the arrival of Trump's largest aircraft carrier, the expectations of the Maduro government and a few other people besides are that a major attack may well be imminent. Maduro has accused Trump of having imperialistic aims to force regime change, not just, as claimed, to interrupt illegal drug trafficking. So he has been preparing his own armed forces to respond should that attack turn into reality. Now, whether that's got much of a chance of slowing the US down, if it actually comes to a straight fight, remains to be seen. The military capabilities, particularly of dictatorial regimes, are often bigger in theory than they are in practice. So widespread is corruption in fields such as arms procurement and maintenance. An attack on land against Venezuela would, of course, be an even greater violation of international law. The United States would shrug that fact off, probably, as easily as it does for blowing up boats of unknown people. But it would be exciting if it turned out that the International Criminal Court ended up, let's say, indicting the President of the United States and his Secretary of War in that instance for war crimes. The US is not a signatory to the ICC. It would attack it and sanction its judges as it did when they did the same to Benjamin Netanyahu. But many countries where Trump would travel would indeed be signatories. In theory, they would be obliged to arrest the president to turn him over to The Hague. Yeah, in practice, not a single one of them would dare to try that. And indeed, they might end up all one after the other, ending their association with the ICC so as not to provoke the president's displeasure, because that's how it seems to work in the current world. International law that says you do not blow up civilians just because you can, that gets ignored with impunity. The power of and enthusiasm for inflicting pain by the United States president is much more the reality that everyone is dealing with. Until that line that must exist gets crossed. And it seems for the UK and Canadian intelligence services that already happened. Does it escalate in short order, or does it remain just one of those little difficulties on the fringe that remains under the carpet, no one commenting on them? Because after all, they can say they never talk about intelligence matters. On the current direction of travel, you'd have to predict it's really probably only going to be a matter of time. And what happens then is going to get very exciting indeed.